What happens when Hollywood's golden boy walks into a late-night studio expecting laughs, but walks straight into a storm? Before we dive in, make sure you hit subscribe to Talk Flair right now, smash that like button, and drop a comment because this story, this clash, you're about to witness is one people are still arguing about. The lights inside the Ed Sullivan Theater dimmed just slightly, that familiar pre-show hum vibrating through the audience like a held breath. The band finished their warm-up riff. The crowd was electric. On cue, the announcer's voice boomed across the room, introducing the host of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Out walked Stephen Colbert, suit sharp, smile sharper. He basked in applause, soaking it in like a seasoned ringmaster. He delivered his monologue with precision, politics, pop culture, a sly jab at Hollywood's latest headlines. The crowd roared on cue. Then came the name that pushed the energy into overdrive. And my guest tonight, actor, producer, and recently one of the most talked about transformations in film. Please welcome Zac Efron. The cheers were deafening. Efron stepped out with that familiar grin. Older now, more grounded than the Disney heartthrob who once danced through high school musical hallways. His frame was broader, the result of months of brutal training for the Iron Claw, the wrestling biopic that had critics praising his career evolution. He waved to the crowd, eyes scanning the room, jaw tight but smiling. He and Colbert shook hands. For a moment, everything seemed normal. They sat. Colbert leaned forward. Zac, I have to say, first of all, you look like you could bench press this entire audience. Laughter. Efron chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. But seriously, Colbert continued, the transformation for the Iron Claw intense. Brutal workouts, diet changes. I heard you were eating every 2 hours. That's dedication, or insanity. Efron's smile flickered. It was discipline. The story deserved that. The host raised an eyebrow. Method acting? Or midlife crisis at 35? The audience laughed again, louder this time. Efron's eyes narrowed just slightly. Barely noticeable. But there. Definitely not a crisis, he replied, voice steady. More like growth. Colbert leaned back, sensing the subtle shift. He pushed. Growth. Interesting word. Because a lot of people still see you as the kid from High School Musical. Does that bother you? There it was. The question. The audience murmured. Efron's jaw tightened. He glanced down briefly, then back up. It doesn't bother me, he said slowly. But it does box you in. I've worked hard to step outside of that. Colbert smiled, but this time it wasn't playful. And yet here we are. People still screaming Troy Bolton. The audience laughed again, some even calling out the character's name. For a split second, something flashed across Efron's face. Exhaustion? Frustration? He forced a laugh. Yeah, it was a big part of my life. But it's not all of it. Colbert leaned forward again. But it made you, right? Without Disney, no Greatest Showman, no Iron Claw, no new rom-com. He was referring to A Family Affair, Efron's recent release. A Netflix romantic comedy that showed a lighter side again, paired opposite Hollywood royalty. Efron shifted in his seat. I'm grateful for where I started, he said carefully. But I also put in the work after. The Greatest Showman didn't just happen. The mention of The Greatest Showman hung in the air. A film that reignited his musical credibility and proved he could command a global box office outside of Disney. Colbert nodded slowly. True, though some critics say your recent choices are a bit identity hunting. The audience went quiet. That was not in the cue cards. Efron blinked once. Identity hunting? Colbert shrugged casually. Wrestler. Serial killer. Romantic lead. Environmental docuseries guy. Who is Zac Efron now? The question wasn't loud, but it hit hard. The studio felt colder. Efron's fingers laced together. He inhaled. For a moment, it looked like he might deflect with humor. Instead, he leaned forward. I'm someone who almost lost himself. The audience shifted. Colbert tilted his head, intrigued. Efron continued. There was a time when the pressure, the image, the expectations, it gets heavy. You make mistakes. You learn. You grow. The room was silent now. And the last few years? They've been about rebuilding. Physically. Mentally. Personally. Colbert nodded, softer now. Rebuilding from what? Efron hesitated. The camera zoomed slightly. He could have kept it vague. Kept it safe. Instead, from believing that I had to be what everyone expected. A ripple of applause. Colbert smiled, but something in his eyes suggested he wasn't done. Fair. But some people might say the dramatic body transformations, The constant reinvention. It feels like you're chasing approval. The air shifted again. Efron's shoulders squared. Or, he said quietly, maybe I'm chasing purpose. The tension was palpable now. Even the band members were still. Colbert gave a small laugh, trying to lighten it. I'm just asking what people at home are thinking. Efron met his gaze directly. Sometimes what people at home are thinking is shaped by how we frame it here. The audience gasped softly. That was a shot. Colbert's smile froze. Oh, I frame things? You're good at it, Efron replied calmly. You're one of the best. The compliment didn't soften the edge. For the first time that night, Colbert leaned back, not as a host steering the show, but as a man recalibrating. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh. And just like that, what started as another promotional interview had turned into something far more combustible. The storm had arrived, and we were only getting started. The commercial break cue flashed, but neither man moved. Colbert broke the silence first. Well, Zac, I appreciate honesty. Let's talk about that rebuilding. Because that's interesting. His tone had shifted. Less teasing. More probing. Efron nodded. You've been open about stepping away from Hollywood for a while. Australia. Nature. Focusing on your health. Was that escape? Efron exhaled slowly. It was survival. The audience leaned in. I hit a point where I didn't recognize myself anymore, he admitted. Not physically. Not mentally. Everything was about headlines. About what people thought I should be. Colbert folded his hands. And now I choose my projects based on whether they scare me. Or challenge me. Like playing a real-life wrestling icon. Yes. Colbert tilted his head. But that role nearly broke you physically. Efron's voice sharpened slightly. It built me. The two locked eyes again. There it was. Not anger, but resistance. Colbert tried humor again. You know, most of us just join a gym when we're stressed. Laughter, thin this time. Efron didn't laugh. I wasn't stressed, he said quietly. I was committed. The pause that followed felt endless. In living rooms across America, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Because this wasn't the usual late-night dance anymore. This was two powerful personalities circling something deeper. Ego, identity, respect. And the audience could feel it. The applause sign lit up, but the clapping felt uncertain. Something had shifted permanently. And neither man was backing down. To be continued. The cameras returned from commercial, but the air hadn't reset. It felt thicker now. Charged. The applause rolled in, yet it lacked the carefree rhythm from earlier. The audience sensed it. The interview had crossed an invisible line. What was meant to be playful promotion had turned into something raw, unpredictable. Stephen Colbert adjusted his cue cards, glancing briefly at them before looking back at Zac Efron. Welcome back, Colbert said smoothly, though the edge in his voice remained. We're here with Zac Efron, star of The Iron Claw, a family affair, and apparently, a man on a journey of purpose. A ripple of nervous laughter. Efron smiled politely, but his eyes were different now. Focused. Guarded. Colbert leaned in. You mentioned rebuilding. Surviving. That's heavy stuff for a late-night couch. It's real stuff, Efron replied. The audience murmured. Colbert nodded. Fair enough. Let's talk real. He placed the cue cards on his desk. No jokes. You've had a career most actors would kill for. Global fame before 21. You've worked with massive directors. You've had box office hits, critical acclaim. But you've also had public struggles, rehab headlines, body scrutiny, rumors about plastic surgery, speculation about your face after that injury. The room stiffened. Efron inhaled slowly. You ever feel, Colbert continued, like the public owns you? There it was again. The push. Efron didn't look away this time. I think, he began carefully, when you grow up in front of the world, people feel entitled to your story. And they're not, Colbert asked. They're entitled to the work, Efron shot back. Not the wounds. The audience gasped softly. Colbert's eyebrows lifted. He hadn't expected that speed. Strong words, he said. They're honest words. A pause. The band was silent. The crowd leaned forward. Colbert clasped his hands together. Let me ask it differently. You've reinvented yourself several times. From Disney icon to dramatic actor. From musical heartthrob to dark roles like playing Ted Bundy. The mention of Efron portraying the infamous serial killer in Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile hung heavy in the air. That role, Colbert said, was controversial. Some argued it glamorized a monster. Efron's jaw flexed. It didn't, he said firmly. It showed manipulation. It showed how evil can hide behind charm. Colbert tilted his head. But you are charming. A few scattered laughs. Efron didn't smile. Which is exactly why it was important, he replied. Colbert studied him closely. Do you ever worry that Hollywood keeps casting you based on your looks, even when you're trying to escape that? Efron's lips pressed together for a brief second. I used to, he admitted. And now I don't build my self-worth around whether someone thinks I look good on a poster. There was a quiet applause from the audience. Colbert nodded, then leaned back in his chair, studying Efron like a chess opponent. But the physical transformations, they're extreme. The Iron Claw wasn't just a role, it was a physical overhaul. Reports said you were in pain constantly. Your body barely recognized itself. It was hard, Efron said simply. Why push that far? Efron's gaze drifted briefly toward the audience before returning to Colbert. Because the story mattered. Because those men's lives mattered. And because I wanted to prove something to myself. Colbert caught the phrasing immediately. To yourself, he repeated. Not to critics? No. Not to audiences? No. Not to headlines? Efron's voice sharpened. No. The audience felt it again, that spark. Colbert leaned forward slightly. So what were you proving? Efron didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. I was proving that I'm more than a phase, he said finally. That line landed. Not flashy, not loud, but it carried weight. The audience broke into genuine applause this time. Colbert nodded slowly. That sounds personal. It is, because there was a time when people stopped taking you seriously. Efron didn't hesitate. Yes. The honesty disarmed the room. Colbert softened slightly. Did that hurt? Efron gave a small laugh. This one real, but edged with memory. Of course it hurt. Imagine working your whole life at something, and people reduce you to one chapter. High School Musical, Colbert said. Efron nodded. The audience reacted nostalgically. It changed my life, Efron continued. I'll always be grateful. But it also created a shadow. And stepping out of that shadow takes time. Colbert crossed his legs, thoughtful now. But isn't that shadow also your foundation? Efron's eyes flickered. Yes, he said carefully. But foundations aren't ceilings. A louder applause erupted. Colbert smiled. That's a good line. Efron shrugged. It's a true one. The energy shifted again, not combative but intense. Colbert glanced toward the crowd, then back to Efron. You've also had very public life changes. Moving abroad. Stepping away from Hollywood. Focusing on environmental projects. Your docuseries. He was referring to Efron's Netflix series Down to Earth with Zac Efron. Was that part of the rebuild? Colbert asked. Yes, Efron said. I needed to reconnect with something real. Nature doesn't care about your box office numbers. Laughter lighter this time. Colbert smirked. Trees are notoriously harsh critics. Efron finally laughed fully. But Colbert wasn't done. Some critics, he said carefully, felt that Down to Earth came off as curated. Like you were trying to craft a new image. The mindful evolved Zac. There it was again, the insinuation. Efron's laughter faded. You think growth is branding? He asked calmly. I'm asking, Colbert replied evenly. Efron leaned forward slightly. I think when someone changes publicly, it makes people uncomfortable. They'd rather you stay the version they recognize. The audience murmured agreement. Colbert tapped his desk lightly. Or maybe they just want authenticity. And what if that is authentic? Efron countered. The two locked eyes again. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Colbert's smile thinned. You seem defensive. Efron didn't flinch. I'm protective. Of what? My peace. The room went silent again. This wasn't banter anymore. It felt like two philosophies colliding, satire versus sincerity, host versus guest, control versus vulnerability. Colbert leaned back slowly. You know, he said, voice measured, my job is to ask uncomfortable questions. Efron nodded. And my job is to answer them honestly. The audience clapped instinctively. But there was tension underneath it, like applause at the end of a boxing round. Colbert glanced toward the camera briefly, then back at Efron. One last thing before we move on, he said. Do you feel misunderstood? Efron's eyes softened. Yes. The answer was immediate. No hesitation. Yes, he repeated. But I'm okay with that now. Colbert studied him carefully. And why's that? Because the people who actually know me, Efron said quietly, don't misunderstand me. The line hung in the air. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Colbert's expression shifted, less combative now, almost reflective. Well, he said slowly, that's probably a healthier place to live than Twitter. The audience laughed, tension easing slightly. But beneath the humor, something permanent had happened. The interview had peeled back layers neither man had fully prepared for. The crowd applauded as the segment wrapped. But in living rooms across the country, viewers were already debating. Was Colbert pushing too hard? Was Efron too defensive? Or was this simply what happens when two strong personalities refuse to play the expected roles? As the show cut to another brief pause before the next segment, Efron leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Colbert shuffled his notes, but didn't look at them, because both men knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. When the show returned for the final stretch of the interview, the applause sounded different. Not louder, not softer, just heavier. The kind of applause that follows something unresolved. Stephen Colbert straightened his tie, glancing briefly at the camera before turning back to Zac Efron. The polished grin was back, but now it felt intentional, controlled. All right, Colbert began, voice measured. Let's pivot slightly. You've had an incredible run lately. The Iron Claw earning critical praise. A family affair bringing you back into romantic comedy. And there's talk of more producing projects behind the scenes. Efron nodded. Yeah, I've been developing a few things. Taking control of your narrative? Colbert asked. Taking responsibility for it, Efron replied. A subtle difference. Colbert leaned back. You know, there's an interesting pattern in your career. When things get intense publicly, you go quiet. You disappear. Australia. Remote islands. No red carpets. The audience chuckled softly. You make it sound dramatic, Efron said. Isn't it? Efron tilted his head slightly. It's called balance. Colbert tapped his desk lightly. Some might call it retreat. The word landed like a stone in water. Efron didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched. Colbert pressed on. Hollywood is competitive. Ruthless. You step away, someone else steps in. Did you ever worry that disappearing meant being forgotten? There it was again, that push toward vulnerability wrapped in challenge. Efron leaned forward slowly, elbows on his knees. I used to, he admitted. When I was younger, I thought visibility meant value. And now I know peace is more valuable than visibility. A murmur of approval from the crowd. Colbert smiled faintly. That's a very zen answer. It's a learned one, Efron replied. Colbert studied him. Learned the hard way? Efron's jaw tightened. Yes. The tension returned, quieter this time, but sharper. Colbert flipped a card over, though he didn't look at it. You've spoken about the accident that changed your face, he said carefully. The jaw injury, the rumors that followed, the speculation online. The audience shifted uncomfortably. It became a global conversation, Colbert continued. Memes, headlines, think pieces. Efron's expression hardened, not with anger, but with something deeper. Fatigue. It was a serious injury, he said evenly. My jaw shattered. My muscles had to compensate. It wasn't cosmetic. Colbert nodded. And yet the internet decided otherwise. Yes. Did that hurt? Efron paused. It didn't hurt, he said quietly. It disappointed me. The audience fell silent again. Colbert leaned forward. Because it reminded me how quickly people reduce you to an image. A beat. You build a career, Efron continued. You work on your craft. You pour yourself into roles, physically, emotionally. And one viral post can rewrite your story. Colbert didn't interrupt this time. You know what the strange part was? Efron added. What? Colbert asked softly. I didn't even know it was happening. I was recovering, living my life. And suddenly I'm trending for something I didn't choose. The audience reacted with quiet empathy. Colbert nodded slowly. That loss of control. Yes. The word hung heavy. Colbert's tone shifted. Less adversarial now, more curious. You've been famous for over 15 years. When did it stop feeling glamorous? Efron gave a small, almost wistful smile. It was never glamorous to me. It was exciting. Overwhelming. But glamorous? That's how it looks from the outside. The band members exchanged glances. Colbert crossed his arms lightly. You make it sound like fame is a burden. It can be, Efron replied. If you let it define you. Colbert tilted his head. And did you? Efron met his gaze directly. For a while. The honesty cut through the room. Colbert let the silence breathe this time. No jokes, he said quietly. Was there a moment you almost walked away completely? The audience collectively held its breath. Efron didn't answer immediately. There was a moment, he said finally, where I thought maybe this industry and I weren't aligned anymore. And what stopped you? Efron's eyes softened slightly. The work. Colbert raised an eyebrow. The work. The storytelling. The collaboration. The challenge. When I'm on set, really on set, it's not about headlines. It's about truth. Colbert nodded slowly. So the Iron Claw was truth? Yes. And a family affair? Efron smiled faintly. That was joy. The audience laughed gently. Joy's underrated, Colbert said. It is. But some critics, Colbert added carefully, said a family affair felt like a safe choice. A step back into comfort. There it was again, the needle. Efron exhaled through his nose, a subtle sign of restraint. Why does joy have to be comfort? He asked. Colbert blinked. Fair question. Efron continued, voice steady but firm. Sometimes choosing something lighter isn't retreat. It's healing. The audience applauded. Colbert leaned back, studying him. You're good at this, he said. At what? Turning the question. Efron smirked slightly. I've been interviewed a lot. The crowd laughed. Colbert smiled, but there was a flicker in his eyes, competitive, almost impressed. Let me ask you something less polished, Colbert said suddenly. Okay. Do you like who you are right now? The question hit differently. No subtext. No satire. Just direct. Efron blinked once. Then twice. The studio felt impossibly quiet. Yes, he said finally. Not defensive. Not performative. Just steady. Colbert watched him closely, searching for cracks. And if Hollywood vanished tomorrow? Efron didn't hesitate this time. I'd still like who I am. The applause was immediate. Genuine. Colbert nodded slowly. You know, he said, voice softer now, that's not something a lot of people in this town can say. Efron shrugged slightly. It took work. The two men sat in silence for a brief moment. No tension this time. Just recognition. But Colbert wasn't finished. One more thing, he said. Do you feel like interviews like this help your story, or complicate it? The audience murmured. Efron smiled faintly. I think they reveal it. And what's being revealed tonight? Efron looked directly at him. That I'm not interested in being the version of me that makes everyone comfortable. The crowd reacted audibly. Colbert let out a slow breath. Well, he said with a half-smile, that makes two of us. The tension broke, slightly. Laughter returned. But underneath it, something profound had happened. The dynamic had shifted from host versus guest to two men defending their philosophies of visibility, identity, and control. As the band began to softly play the outro riff, Colbert turned toward the camera. My thanks to Zac Efron. The applause swelled. They stood. They shook hands. But this time, it wasn't the light, promotional handshake from earlier. It was firmer, measured, a silent acknowledgement that the conversation had gone somewhere neither fully planned. As Efron walked off stage, the camera caught him exhaling deeply. Backstage, producers whispered. In control rooms, directors replayed certain lines. On social media, clips were already being cut. And in the studio, Colbert sat back down at his desk, staring for just a moment at the space where Efron had been sitting. The smile returned for the next segment. But his eyes betrayed it, because something about that exchange had lingered. And outside those studio walls, the fallout was already beginning. By the time the show signed off and the credits rolled on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the internet was already on fire. Clips spread like wildfire across X, TikTok, Instagram. 30-second edits. 10-second reaction shots. Freeze frames of eye contact between Zac Efron and Stephen Colbert. Captions screamed. Tension you could cut with a knife. Did Zac just call out Colbert? Late night gets uncomfortable. Inside the studio, the applause had faded, but the energy hadn't. Backstage, producers replayed moments on monitors. Did you see his face when Stephen said retreat? That line about foundations aren't ceilings, that's going viral. Efron stood in the hallway outside his dressing room, jacket slung over his shoulder. His publicist spoke in hushed tones nearby, already fielding messages. You good? She asked. Efron nodded slowly. Yeah, but his jaw was tight. Inside the studio, Colbert remained at his desk longer than usual. The band had packed up. The crew moved quietly around him. He stared at his cue cards for a moment, then set them down. He'd done thousands of interviews. Politicians, actors, activists, authors. But this one felt different. It hadn't been explosive in the loud way. No shouting, no walk-offs, no insults. It had been controlled, measured, and somehow that made it more volatile. Meanwhile, online battle lines were being drawn. Colbert was just doing his job. No, he pushed too hard. Zac handled that with class. Zac was defensive. Think pieces started appearing before midnight. One outlet framed it as a generational clash, satirical media versus sincerity culture. Another called it the moment Zac Efron finally stepped out of Troy Bolton's shadow for good, referencing his breakout role in High School Musical. But the clip that truly detonated? The moment Efron said, "They're entitled to the work, not the wounds." It was reposted millions of times. Actors commented. Athletes shared it. Even mental health advocates amplified it. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a late-night interview. It was about ownership, about identity, about who controls a narrative in an age where everyone thinks they're entitled to one. The next morning, headlines multiplied. Entertainment Tonight replayed the segment with dramatic music underneath. Morning talk shows debated whether Colbert had crossed a line. Podcast hosts dissected every micro-expression. And fans were split. Some felt protective of Efron, remembering his public struggles, his rehab headlines, the scrutiny over his face after his injury, the years of reinvention from extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile to the iron claw to the lighter tone of a family affair. Others defended Colbert, arguing that satire and sharp questions were the backbone of late-night television. By afternoon, hashtag Zac Efron and hashtag Colbert were both trending. And then something unexpected happened. Neither of them posted anything. No subtweets. No clarifications. No behind-the-scenes selfies to soften the narrative. Just silence. That silence only fueled speculation. Are they feuding? Was it staged? Was it real tension? Media analysts replayed the handshake at the end of the show in slow motion. It looked firm. Colbert leaned in slightly. Zac didn't smile as wide. Every gesture became evidence. Meanwhile, Efron boarded a flight out of New York. A quiet exit. Baseball cap low. Headphones in. As the plane lifted off, he stared out the window. For years, interviews had felt like performances. Quick jokes, polished answers, deflections. But this one had been different. He hadn't performed. He had responded, and that difference mattered to him. Across town, Colbert opened his monologue that night with a brief, almost surgical acknowledgement. Last night, things got introspective. The audience laughed. But hey, he added with a smirk, growth is branding. The callback drew a bigger laugh, but it also reignited debate online. Was he poking fun? Or doubling down? Clips of that line spread instantly. Comment sections exploded again. The narrative evolved from awkward interview to philosophical clash. Think pieces now framed it as two worldviews colliding. One man built on satire, irony, and sharp framing. The other fighting to escape framing altogether. And then 3 days later, Zac Efron did something subtle, but powerful. During a press junket for his upcoming producing project, a reporter asked about the interview. He smiled. "I think conversations are healthy," he said calmly. "Even uncomfortable ones. No shade, no anger, just composure." That quote circulated just as widely as the original confrontation. Colbert, for his part, mentioned Efron again a week later, this time praising his performance in The Iron Claw. No tension in his voice. No edge. Just acknowledgement. And slowly, the storm cooled. But it didn't disappear. Because something about that exchange had stuck with people. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't outrage. It was authenticity rubbing against satire. And in an era where so much feels rehearsed, that friction felt real. Months from now, the viral clips will still circulate. Film students will analyze the body language. Media critics will reference it in essays about celebrity control and late-night power dynamics. And fans? They'll still debate who won. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe no one won. Maybe what we witnessed was something rarer. Two public figures refusing to shrink into their expected roles. One defending the right to question, the other defending the right to evolve. And in that tension, something honest broke through. Now I want to hear from you. Did Stephen Colbert push too far? Or was Zac Efron simply tired of being framed? Was it tension or truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I read them all. And if you love deep dives into explosive celebrity moments like this, where the spotlight reveals more than anyone planned, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair and turn on notifications. because the next story might be even more intense.